My name is Pablo Berrutti. I'm a co-founder of Altiorem, the sustainable finance library, which you'll hear a little bit more about if you're not already familiar with us. But we're here to actually have a really a landmark and milestone event in our history as an organisation is the launch of our first report. Before I do that, now for those of you who aren't aware, some of us are sitting in Australia. We also have people in Norway, and obviously most of you will be in Europe. And in Australia, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners in the lands where we reside. And so I'm coming to you from a place called the Eora Nation, which is in New South Wales, near Sydney, and the Gadigal people are the traditional owners of the place where I'm coming to you from. And given we're talking today about what does thriving business look like in a sustainable economy, acknowledging a culture that was able to thrive for 60,000 years in this country is a mark of stewardship that perhaps we can all bring into this discussion today, and a culture and an approach to stewardship that we can all bring into this discussion today. So moving right along, we are extremely excited about this report. We work in a community-built sustainable finance library, as I mentioned, and our goal is to support people across the finance sector to be more effective advocates and to implement the changes that are needed to bring sustainable finance into reality. And the way that we do that is we work with volunteers, university students, industry professionals who curate, collect, summarize, and categorize research and populate the library in such a way that it's very much action orientated, helping people to learn and also to take those actions to bring sustainable finance into reality. And if you're not familiar with Altiorem, I encourage you to register and check it out. It's completely free to use. Now, as you'd imagine, with all of the research that we see coming into the library, that also gives us a perspective on the types of topics which are not getting enough attention, where further research is needed, where conversation needs to be started. And this topic today, in terms of how business models need to evolve and change in order to fit within a sustainable economy, is one of those topics. And one of Altiorem's community, Sara Fossum, who I'll introduce shortly, worked with us for almost 2 years in developing this report and leading the authoring of this report to explore that subject. And what was really striking about it is that it touches on issues that we don't often discuss. And I'm not going to steal Sara's thunder. I'm going to wait and let her explain all of those. But if you've ever looked at an ESG index, if you've ever wondered why a tobacco company is in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, or why a soft drink manufacturer is in a circular economy index, you'll feel that something is quite odd and not right with the way that we're thinking about and rating ESG and sustainability. And we won't get into the debates about the separation of those things. But what we found is that a lot of the things that Sara has explored in the report are not even touched on in any ESG rating, in any sustainability framework that we're aware of, except for two. And so we're very privileged to have a couple of leading thinkers in that space for the panel a bit later. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Sara to run through the report, and then we'll come back to the panel session later. So thank you for coming, and we'll move over to Sara.
So my name is Sara, and I work as a sustainability manager in Laerdal Medical, and I have authored this report together with Altiorem. So this project actually started as part of my master in sustainability back in 2021. And as Pablo said, we've been working on this report ever since then. So today I will take you through the key findings in the report with a special focus on the sustainable business model canvas. But first, let me just give you a brief overview of what you can find in the report. At first, we're looking at what it takes to achieve a sustainable economy. Then we look at what are the main sustainability issues with the contemporary business model fitting into a sustainable economy. Then we address how business models need to change in order to fit in or even thrive in a sustainable economy. And then lastly, we're presenting the sustainable business model canvas and how you might use that as a business or an investor. So in the report, we are addressing different models and approaches to a sustainable economy. Some of these include the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Footprint Network, but we have had a specific focus on Doughnut Economics. And the reason for this is that the model is easy to understand, yet it is complex and it covers all of the key elements of a sustainable economy. And the Doughnut Economics model was developed by Kate Raworth, and it is a model for a regenerative and distributive economy, so where society's needs are met and society thrives within the planetary boundaries. So as you can see here in the model, the inner circle represents the social foundation. So this is where all of society's needs are met and there is an opportunity and life of dignity for all. And then the outside circle represents the ecological ceiling. And this is where the planetary boundaries are met. So resource use and pollution cannot be exceeded this level if we are to attain a thriving and healthy environment. So then we looked at the contemporary business models and we identified 5 key areas in which are the biggest limitations for current business model thriving in a sustainable economy. The first one here is linearity and the take, make, waste model. Then we have the short-term mindset. So the excessive focus on the short-term gains, which is really undermining the long-term value creation. Then we have growth and profit maximization. So this is not to say that growth and profit are not important, because they are still important aspects of a sustainable business model, but however, only to a certain extent. So in the current business model, there is an excessive focus on growth and profit maximization as a goal in itself, and this is really driving unsustainable practices throughout the business's value chains. So then we have exploitative and unequal distribution. So this refers to value chains or supply chains that are exploitative both socially and environmentally. Examples of this include poor working conditions and also lack of environmental protection throughout the supply chain. And then in addition, we also have unequal distribution of the value created throughout the value chain. Lastly, we have operational efficiency as sustainability strategy. And sustainability has gained a lot of momentum, especially during the last few years. And we're seeing a lot of companies developing sustainability strategies. However, the issue is that these strategies are often just put on top of the business as usual or their normal operations, and they really fail to incorporate sustainability into the core of the business. And another failure is that they often only tackle the supply side of the business and they neglect the demand side. And this is why we have developed the Sustainable Business Model Canvas. And this kind of brings together all of the elements that you need to address in order to attain a sustainable business model. First, we look at purpose, then organization, then production, delivery, and lastly, we finish up with the impact. So now we will take you through each of these areas. So the first area is purpose, and this represents a fundamental part of the business's foundation. So in a sustainable economy, all businesses really need to have a purpose that is contributing towards attaining a healthy and thriving society and environment. And what this really means is that the businesses need to directly or indirectly contribute in creating sustainable and environmental value in a sufficient way. And a company that exemplifies this is the UK-based Recycling Lives. So they have their commercial operations, which are within waste management and recycling, which obviously produces environmental value through circularization. And they use this to support their charity in supporting ex-offenders in rehabilitation, which is obviously creating social value. Then we have organization, which is another key element of the business's foundation and like the building blocks of how the business operates and is organized. So here we have 5 areas, the first one being the ownership. And a business's owners and their objectives are really elemental in what the business's focus areas is, what kind of choices they make and direction that they're going in. So ultimately, the owner's objectives are really influencing all parts of the business model. And in the contemporary business models, we see that these objectives are often led by, short-termism and short-term gains in profit and growth maximization, which are really leading to unsustainable practices. So we've seen that alternative ownership models, such as, for example, the employee ownership, can really help tackle some of these issues. Then we have value distribution in the supply chain. And from a social perspective, this leads to how businesses need to be inclusive and diverse by design. So what this means is that the value created throughout the value chain of the business needs to be more equally distributed. And from an environmental perspective, this means that environmental protection and regeneration needs to be a fundamental part of the business's operations and processes throughout its value chain. Then we have networks. And a business's networks are its key stakeholders. These include customers, suppliers, partners, etc. And as a business set a goal and set their values and missions, in order to reach those, they're really dependent on their entire network being aligned in terms of the values and goals that are set. And in addition, in order to attain a low carbon and circular economy, which is the goal, we're really dependent on having infrastructure and ecosystems that are facilitating this. And ultimately, companies need to assess their role in helping to facilitate such a shift, across industries. Then we have operational time frame. So currently, as we've talked about earlier, the excessive focus on the short-term gain is really undermining the ability to create long-term and sustainable value. So in order to attain a sustainable business model, ultimately, you have to shift away from only focusing on the short-term gains to focus on how can we create long-term and sustainable value. Then lastly, we have governance. And a company's governance and ESG reporting are really key in not only driving the right decisions and controlling the metrics and the progress of the business that it's making, but also it's key in order to communicate how it's performing in terms of sustainability to its stakeholders. And in addition, for investors, it's really key to have adequate ESG data in order to ensure that they can steer capital towards sustainable development. And a company that exemplifies how all of these elements really influence each other and come together is Laerdal Medical, where I currently work. And so Laerdal Medical is a family-owned business, and it is a very much purpose-driven business. So we have a goal of helping save 1 million more lives every year by 2030. And what I find really interesting is how, the objectives of the owners of obviously creating social impact and doing so in a sustainable manner is really driving, and it's reflected throughout the business model. And it's affecting several of these areas, such as, for example, the operational time frame. And I've seen how we have the ability, due to this, to have a more focus on the long-term value creation rather than only the short-term gains and profits. Then we have production. And this presents the supply side of a business's operations. So to achieve a sustainable production of goods and services, a company really needs to focus on 3 main areas. The first one is energy and resource efficiency. This means using fewer materials and less energy to create less waste and pollution, and to do so with creating similar kind of functionalities in the solutions that they make. Then we have circularity, and this refers to creating value from waste, keeping resources in the loop, but also really designing out waste from the whole value chain. And lastly, we have using renewable and natural processes rather than using non-renewables and man-made artificial production systems. And an example of a company that's really optimized a kind of circular approach to their business is Tomra. And they're operating a clean loop recycling system where they offer payment for returned drinking bottles that are made of plastics, aluminum, and glass. And just how effective this kind of system can be is really evident in Norway, where I'm from, where we actually recycle 92% of all of our drinking bottles. Then we have delivery, and delivery represents the demand side of the business's operations. So in order for a business to attain a sustainable business model, it really needs to go beyond looking at the supply side to also cover the demand side of their value chain. So what this means is that they need to assess how sufficient their value creation and delivery is. And this means that they need to ensure that they not promote overconsumption. Ways in which that a company can do this is through digitalization and also circularity and sharing models, which can really promote sufficiency and also more circular approaches to value delivery. And a company that is exemplifying how you might focus on sufficiency in your delivery is Citizen Wolf, which is a t-shirt manufacturer. And what they do is that they offer free alterations and also free repairs of all t-shirts. And they also have a make-to-order strategy. So ultimately, they are really designing out avoided emissions, waste, and also commercial loss. Then lastly, we have impact, and this is where it all kind of comes together. So a company really needs to assess their total impact on a continuous level. So what this means is that they need to assess how well they're delivering on their purpose and what kind of value they are actually creating. Not only the intended value, but also the unintended one. And these are often referred to as externalities. So a company really needs to understand and address both their positive and negative externalities. And a company that have started to look into this kind of assessment is Puma. So what they have is something called an environment profit and loss system, where they use a life cycle assessment approach to assess the environmental costs of their products throughout the value chain. And they're also working on integrating the positive impact of the products that they make throughout the value chain. So that was a brief overview of the Sustainable Business Model Canvas. Obviously, you can read more into detail in the report, and there are also more case studies throughout the report. And we developed the canvas to help businesses and investors to be able to assess their alignment with a sustainable economy. And not only to assess where they are today, but also to identify future opportunities and also the ability to be able to change approaching a sustainable economy. So what are the challenges and what are the opportunities, and how might that impact the business itself as we're moving towards a sustainable economy? So with that, I say thank you, and I hand over to Pablo.
Thank you, Sara, and you'll be hearing more from Sara momentarily on the panel, but I also would like to introduce our other panelists and our moderators. The thing that I really love about this report is that it really looks to understand how things need to change to be thriving and sustainable in a future state, rather than taking where we are today and incrementally moving forward. Even if that incremental movement is entirely inadequate, it can sometimes be labeled as sustainable or misdirected. And we have two people who are working within organizations and leading organizations that have that same mindset and bring that same mindset to bear. And so Martin Rich is the first that I'll introduce to you. So Martin, after a career in finance, started the Future Fit Foundation and the Future Fit Framework. Now, Future Fit is a very science-based tool which, through 23 break-even goals and 24 positive pursuits, really puts forward where a business needs to get to. These are non-negotiables, if you like, of the ultimate place where a business needs to be if it is to be sustainable. So rather than incrementally adding, reducing impacts, negative impacts, increasing positive ones, it's really setting that bar out as to where businesses need to get to across multiple areas. And so if you imagine the business model canvas that Sara just presented being the why, Martin certainly provides the what of what needs to be done in order to achieve many of those objectives. We're also joined by Erinch Sahan from the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and so you would have noticed that Sara referred to the donuts. The Action Lab has also just released a tool which will give you a bit of the how to get there. And so we've got the why, we've got the what, we've got the how, and so we're really looking forward to hearing their perspectives on how you can bring the canvas to life. And to guide you through that discussion, we've got Altiorem's Head of Research co-founder, Alexandra Brown, who is also the founder and CEO of Ethical Invest Group, which is a advisory group and educator that supports financial advisors in Australia to deal with many of these questions. So I'll hand over to you, Alexandra, and look forward to the discussion. Please do pop your questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Welcome to everyone online, and also welcome to you if you're watching the replay. I think we will start off with maybe some reflections. So Martin and Erinch, having read the report and just heard from Sara, please could you share with us your reflections on the report and also how it complements other frameworks, including Future Fit and the Doughnut, and where it's different. And maybe if we start with you, Martin.
Absolutely. Well, lovely to be with you. For those who are watching live or the replay, this is for the first time for those of us who were all on the earlier panel. I'm pleased to say the sun has now come up north of London, and I'm feeling a little bit more awake. So it's lovely to be with you all. Again, congratulations, and particularly to you, Sara, for all the work you've done pulling this together and leading it. It's a fantastic report, very timely, great to see it out there. And I think what I really like about it is the way that you're drawing, as Pablo's just said, the why, the what, and the how together. We all know that the current socioeconomic system is broken. We know that things need to change radically. And I think this is a great rallying call at the right time to be calling businesses to change, to break out from these linear short-term mindsets and to really change for what we actually need if we're going to flourish as businesses within a flourishing society on a flourishing planet. And what I particularly like about this report, the fact that it's based in the system science, it's fantastic, and it's a lovely, if not perhaps unexpected coincidence that actually the exact same framework that Kate Raworth used when creating the Doughnut economic model is exactly the same underlying system science framework that we used at Future Fit to build the toolkit for how you get to that future. It's all built on the thing called the natural step, or the framework for strategic sustainable development, to give it its formal title. Comes out of Sweden, but has gone around the world. I know it's extremely well known down in Australia. And it's brilliant to see that these pieces are now being drawn back together, and under this rallying call that sort of Kate has led with the help of Erinch, and I can't wait to hear your comments on this, Erinch. The whole idea of redesigning and rebuilding the socioeconomic model into one that values creation for society, for the environment, the rebuilding of the reserves of the system, and taking us away from this currently degenerative, destructive pathway that we're on. It's a great call. So again, well done to everybody. I think it's fantastic report, and I hope that this helps, continue to build the groundswell of people who are moving in this direction. But Erinch, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Absolute pleasure to join you all. And I'm really excited about this report. I think it opens up a new era of conversation and discussion that is taking us into some uncomfortable territory, and I admire that. These are difficult questions to open up. Have we designed our companies in their deep design, in their structures, in a way that allows them to take the actions we need? The answer is last century's designs of businesses and designs of finance are not sufficient. They're holding back companies and opening up questions of how are businesses owned? How are they governed? These are the kind of questions that we need to dive into pretty quickly. So I'm particularly excited by that. The work that we've done over the last year and a half was to look at Doughnut Economics on a very parallel, similar, complementary journey to Sara, Pablo, and the team, and think through, well, what would it take for business to help humanity into the donut? And the biggest barrier we came across was that the deep design of business is holding back some of these solutions. I mean, we know a lot of these practices. We've known for over a decade how to make a modular mobile phone, how to design it in a way where we create minimum or eventually eliminate e-waste. We know how to bring circular economy thinking into garment production. We know how to treat people in supply chains in a way that provides them dignified lives. We know how to adopt new renewable energy practices. We know all these things, and they're not happening. Something is holding back the actions, and they're happening largely in the margins of our economy, with exceptional businesses doing exceptional things. And when we gathered the different businesses around the world and did work with 300 companies, what we found was often if you go deep enough into the why can't you take these steps? You come across ideas around inflexibility of margins, around how capital expenditure is unlocked or enabled. You come up with this like financial parameters that are imposed through the ownership of the business or the governance model of the business that are holding back viable business models that are maybe not quite profit maximizing enough, and that was a huge revelation. So it became very clear that the conversation we need to have is not just around what we need from business, but the deep design of business that will allow them to do that. And unlocking that means some uncomfortable conversations, but also exciting, because we get to design what's needed for our economy rather than tweak what we inherited from last century, where we didn't know with the level of clarity the kind of challenges we'd be facing as humanity on this natural living planet of ours.
Absolutely, Erinch. That is great passion there too. Very important information. So obviously this is what both of your conversations there are around the why, what, and how. And I guess we don't need to reinvent the wheel. As you say, we have this information out there. So we also have lots of great examples to learn from and aspire to. So in the report, rather than focusing on the issues and the barriers, the report shows us case studies. It shows us a better way of doing business that is not only possible, but is also happening now. So one of my favorites was TOMRA, which Sara referenced in her presentation then. So I think maybe, Sara, we might go back to you and just, were there any other case studies in the report that have stood out to you as a better way of doing business, or perhaps you've got some examples of businesses that are applying the donut already?
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. Yeah, so throughout the report, you will find a lot of different case studies that are exemplifying how, all of these different traits of a new sustainable business model are already existing today. And one of my favorite case study is the Airbnb co-op. And it's similar to the Airbnb, only that it's kind of, it tackles some of the challenges that we're seeing with Airbnb with, its impact on the local community. So what is rare about the Airbnb, which is a purpose-driven company, is that it supports the local community in the process of renting out short-term holiday rentals. So it's both, the company is collectively owned and purpose-driven, and it dedicates 50% of their platform fee to the operating costs, whereas the other 50% go to fund projects in the in the local holiday destination, which is up to the customer to decide where they want to make the fundings go.
Great example there. Martin, do you have any brief examples of companies that you've seen in your own work to add that are doing business better?
Yeah, I mean, loads. Given the time zone, I'll focus on one quickly. In Europe, in Denmark, there's a fantastic organization called Better Energy, which is one of the leading Future Fit users. They're a renewable energy generation company, mainly solar, a little bit in wind, but relatively new and growing organization. And they are literally trying to embed as much of this type of future fit, donut style thinking into the way they are growing the business from the ground up. Now, obviously, there are challenges with wind power. There are challenges with solar power, right? None of these technologies are yet perfect and completely circular, etc. But they're making fantastic strides. And I love the way that they're trying to embed this mindset from day one. Very short anecdote, the lady who's leading this whole program internally was out up in Jutland, up in northern Denmark, I think that is, and was out in the in the field working with some of the engineers, meeting some of the engineers. And she got there and she introduced herself, and one of the guys turned around and went, "Oh, you're the Future Fit lady." Now, this is an engineer out in the field, right? Possibly one of the last guys that you would expect to know something like that. But they've so embedded it into the core of the business. Every single employee knows and appreciates and understands that they are part of this bigger picture. And I think that is a fantastic way to sort of, motivate everybody and to show that the whole company is genuinely on the right journey.
Fantastic. I think we might move the discussion now to corporate purpose. And Erinch, I'll ask you, in the last few years, purpose beyond profit has become a catch cry in business sustainability, but we've also seen charges of purpose washing. So could you give us your thoughts on that one? What do you think makes for a credible and authentic corporate purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the premise of the question. I absolutely can see the gravitation of companies, of PR machinery, of marketing divisions start to take on some of these words, terms like purpose, but also even being regenerative is starting to be used so loosely that it's beginning to threaten the definition of the term. And I think that the most interesting way we can start to really separate the wheat from the chaff on this stuff is to get structural, is to get into what I was saying around the deep design of business. So a really interesting example for me was when Patagonia recently transformed its ownership model. Now, a lot of people talked about, the high level descriptions of this. Earth is our only shareholder, giving the companies ownership over to the planet. All of that's fantastic. But what excited me was the innovation in how they structured their shares. So part of the shares, for instance, are owned by a trust, a foundation that has all the voting rights, but none of the dividend rights. The other part of the shares are owned by an organization, incidentally, an NGO, that has all of the dividend rights, but none of the voting rights. So that means that those that benefit from increases in profit have got no leverage to force the company to increase profits further. And that those that have got the voting rights don't have an incentive to increase the profits further. And that liberates decision makers to really focus on the purpose of the business. If you're a decision maker in Patagonia today versus, say, 6 months ago, where it still had a commitment and a focus on a broader purpose, you're now looking at things probably slightly differently. You can look down your supply chain and think that regenerative agriculture project, the ROI the return on investment wasn't quite as high as we would have liked, and maybe we picked something else, or maybe we didn't quite focus on that. But now, today, you can do it. Now you can take those actions that are viable and that allow the company to focus on its purpose longer term. And I think those are the kind of questions that unlock, is purpose real? Is it just talking about what the company is doing, or is it what the company is becoming? And that's where these questions of ownership and governance, who's on your board? I mean, another really fascinating example, Faith in Nature, put nature on their board. They actually worked with an organization called Lawyers for Nature to say, look, you're going to be one of our 11 voting board members, representing the rights of nature. I mean, that conceptually is a game changer. These ideas all have a history. None of these are brand new. I mean, you know, steward ownership has been around for decades across Northern Europe in particular. But you know, what Patagonia did with steward ownership was, I think, communication-wise, at least a game changer to bring new ideas of purpose into something really meaningful. What Faith in Nature is doing with putting nature on their board, really meaningful, really critical to the purpose conversation. So I think once we start to ask questions like that, you can't fake that stuff. You know, you can't fake who's on your board with voting rights. You can't fake who owns your business and how your share classes are divided and what rights different kind of shareholders have. It's a slightly more techie, wonky conversation, but it's also the one that is where the substance is, where you can't greenwash through it.
Very true, very true. Sarah, did you have anything more to add on what makes a credible and authentic corporate purpose?
Yeah, and I think Erinch makes an excellent point on that. And I also want to add another element, and that is that I think it's really important to distinguish between a purpose-driven company and philanthropy. Because I think a lot of businesses today, and maybe especially business leaders, you know, they have their whole value chain that is not sustainable at all, but then they make a lot of money and they benefit from the structure there is today in terms of regulation and the market, how it is structured. And then, you know, they put a lot of money into communities and a lot of good projects, a lot of climate-related projects. However, they're still lobbying for keeping the same structure and the same regulations that are really destroying our planet and are, you know, increasing inequalities. So I think it's really important when you look at a company and you see all of the things good that they're supporting, you know, look into what are they doing in their value chain. Have they cleaned their own house before they've started to do other things? So I think that's a key point to remember in a time where a lot of people or a lot of companies are you know, purpose driven or
Yeah, I agree. So it, you know, I think with this conversation too, it seems it could seem harder almost for existing businesses than new ones to actually recast their purpose to fit in with a new sustainable economy. Martin, maybe we will start with you, because in our previous panel discussion, we actually had an audience member ask us for examples of organisations, particularly service ones, which is something that we haven't touched on greatly in this conversation today, that have done a good job at retrospectively integrating a worthy purpose that goes beyond financial results. So do you have any thoughts on that one?
I think it's a great point. I think it is definitely easier to start and build from the ground up. I mean, as the Better Energy example I just gave you, or I think, you know, equally if you're a small company or you're privately owned. I mean, interestingly, the company that Sarah works for is privately owned, I think. Is that right, Sarah? Yeah. And I think, you know, when you look at sort of the behemoth organizations out there, it is incredibly hard to change them. So many vested interests, so many, you know, ways of doing things that are the way we've always done things around here. The stakeholders, the shareholders, the board members, everybody is just built into that. Actually, the DNA of the company. I love, you know, Erinch is talking about the deep design of business. I think that's similar to what I, you know, often call the DNA of businesses. And people laugh at me sometimes when I say that and say companies don't have DNA. They absolutely do. And it's amazing that after, you know, even 100 years of existence, often so much of the characteristics installed by the original founders will still be just embedded in the way businesses go around doing what they do. So I think, you know, suddenly we come along with these highfalutin ideas of creating value for planet and society, and not just shareholders and all these wonderful things. Often they're just completely contrary to the way things are done. We know that. It's too much is about externalizing the cost, internalizing the profit, short-term goals and objectives, personal objectives to get onto the board and be the CEO or the chair or whatever it might be. Incredibly hard to turn all of that around. It's not impossible, absolutely not impossible. We are seeing that, but this is the big challenge we face. I think, you know, look at organizations perhaps like Danone. What was the chief exec's name? Emmanuel Fabio something. Somebody will remember. You know who I mean. You know, but I mean, he was really trying to do a bit of a Paul Polman. He was really trying to change the direction of that organization, and ultimately got booted out of the company by activist shareholders who, you know, weren't happy with the overall direction of travel. Now, I'm sure there's more behind that story than, you know, those of us on the outside know or really understand. But it's it's another little example of the pressure that these massive organizations have. So can it be done? Absolutely. Are we seeing that change? Yes, because the stakeholder pressures are rising. As younger members of staff are sort of moving up and taking more power within organizations, we're seeing that shift of focus. But that's all taking a very long time, and we all know that we don't really have that long. So ultimately, I think what that comes down to is there is no sort of one easy solution here. There are multiple pressure points, all of which need to be used. And that's what's going to drive the change. Or maybe, you know, in the new economy, maybe these companies don't exist anymore. And actually, they're all replaced by new startups. Let's see.
Erinch, did you have anything more to add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think one other question that could pop up as we explore this and really delve into the question of how do we change, how do we redesign companies to be fit for the future in Martin's terminology, is that there's going to be sometimes people focusing on culture and individual shift, others that focus on structure and, you know, changing governance, etc. And of course, the two feed off each other, you know, because often I'm sometimes frustrated by attempts that focus purely on culture without acknowledging this thing is structured not to allow you to do that. You have to increase dividends. You have to report in a particular way. You're accountable to a board that is exclusively accountable to its shareholders. You know, within that design, what is possible is incredibly limited. We essentially have put a straitjacket on people, and then tell them as employees, as in leaders, as people coming into a business, to go off and do what you can now to save the world. But we've put this huge straitjacket that we need to remove. And I think that question of unlocking the cultural possibilities in companies, whilst also recognizing we need to take the structural reform into this. So we need a different kind of design of companies. And I also agree that a lot of these discussions, in fact, all exclusively the examples we gave are all from the global north. And as somebody who worked in the fair trade world and in supply chains, I feel the responsibility to say, actually, a lot of this is happening in communities around the world, whether it's Manos de Uruguay in Uruguay, which has existed since the 1960s as a enterprise that is co-owned by women producer groups spread across the country, or you know, various sort of farmer and independent cooperatives and social enterprise models around the world, or indigenous models of enterprise that exist, that work in symbiosis with nature. And one particular example comes to mind, a guy called Matthew John I met, who leads a business called Last Forest in India. I remember talking to him about how do we scale your business. He's got this amazing social enterprise, creating products that are, you know, that are using natural outputs of the local forest. And he told me that, look, Erinch, maybe you don't need to make me much bigger. Maybe what needs to happen is we need to have more businesses that are spreading through replication rather than just size of individual companies. And some companies have a natural size that they need to respect. Anything bigger in that context would overuse the local natural resources. He'd found a way to live in balance with his local ecology. And I think bringing in those sorts of ideas, the wisdom that exists outside of the global north as well, is a really critical insight for us, and I think a humbling one in us going forward in redesigning business.
True.
Can I just jump in and just
Martin.
add to that, because I think there's a really good point there on scale and our mad obsession with everything has to scale. Interestingly, I sort of really stumbled into this in the impact investment world when I was working there for a few years. And there's many good things about the impact investment world, but it was interesting to see how much the sort of the private equity mindset had been drawn into that world, and the idea that every single social enterprise had to scale and become, world leading. And I often found myself saying, but what if the mom who has started this local daycare center for her local community only wants to do that? What if actually that's enough for her and that business? And to Erinch's great point, actually, there may be learning and there may be replication that can come from that. And if there are people who could go in and sort of write down what she's done and guidance points and publish that freely, so others could go, hey, that's a great idea, I want to do that. That sort of replication and rollout is fantastic, but not that she becomes the chief exec of a multi-billion-dollar global business when all she wanted to do was care for kids in her local community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great points, both of you, excellent points. We've actually got a question from the audience, and I think it kind of leads into that because we're talking about genuine roadblocks to doing this. So they'd be interested in thoughts on regulation that companies are currently required to operate in. These are genuine roadblocks. Are they that, or are they an excuse for change? And anyone on the panel here, do you have any examples of positive change in this regard that you've seen?
I'm happy to jump in terms of the kind of positive change that we saw in different kinds of size companies. I mean, of course, we already talked a bit about Danone and about Paul Polman as well as being a pioneer at Unilever. And I think one of the great legacies of Paul Polman was to make sure that the company also had a broader shareholder ownership to guard against future hostile acquisitions. So he increased employee ownership within Unilever's shareholding, which would be a very important factor in retaining the purpose that he was trying to build into the company. And I think a lot of these actions can be gradual. They don't always have to result in a sudden shift in the construction of the business, its ownership, its shares, its governance, etc. You could bring things in. Of course, examples like Faith in Nature, I think, of bringing in a new board member that represents a different stakeholder group into the board is also a step that can be taken by any business, really. So the roadblocks, though, I think are numerous and often come from capital markets or the representatives of capital markets in the business world.
That's true. So we've got obviously roadblocks with regulation. Martin, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'd say I want to sound a sort of a word of caution there, particularly around all the reporting regulation that we're seeing coming in. Now, there's some great strengths and some potentially great opportunities within the work that ISSB is doing, and that in Europe we're seeing through the EU taxonomy and the CSRD. And on the positive side, you can say this is an opportunity for change. You've got to be reporting on this stuff. So if you are a genuine company, a genuinely values-driven company that's wanting to change, here's a great way to tell your story. Unfortunately, I think what it will also breed an awful lot of is box ticking. The EU taxonomy in particular is very complicated, even in its sort of, its initial cut down phase. They went from something like 2,500 data points to report down to about 1,200 data points. That's a lot of time, that's a lot of investment, and it's a lot of effort that those companies need to put in. And I fear that in a lot of cases, what we're going to see is businesses doing what they have to do and justifying the time spent as, well, we have to, it's the law, rather than what they should be doing. Yeah. And then when, organizations like Future Fit or Doughnut go in and say, hey guys, there's a great alternative that we'd love you to consider. They'll say, look, I'm spending all my time and effort doing this. I have to do this. It's regulation. I'll go to prison if I don't do it or be fined. So, that's law. You're not, go away. And I'm, being deliberately provocative with that. But I think we will see a lot of time and effort put into ticking the boxes, doing what I have to do, saying that's my hygiene and I'm done. And that will unfortunately be a very negative impact from something that is being devised, I think, with the best of intent.
Yeah, 100%. Sarah, is there anything that you wanted to add on the role of regulation and government?
Yeah, I think that is a great point, Martin. And I would also like to add to that point that I think another of the challenges that might occur, obviously it's a good, sign that, we're seeing more and more regulations tackling sustainability related issues. However, one of the other challenges is in relation to, smaller companies versus the bigger companies, because I think, just the amount of as you say, paperwork and frameworks that they need to follow, and it will require a lot of knowledge and resources to do that. And I'm afraid that, it's only the bigger companies that are going to be able to survive that kind of standards that we're seeing now. So, for example, when we look at the supply chain, some of the smaller, maybe local driven businesses might not be able to comply, not because they're not doing enough, but maybe they don't have the knowledge or resources to be able to fill out all of these, frameworks and that kind of thing. So
great points. Now we are running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one more question around the board. If you could just keep it brief for this last one. But what can each of us do to promulgate or promote the concept of the Sustainable Business Canvas? And Erinch, I will lead off with you, please.
Sure. I mean, firstly, use it, talk about it, engage with those that are in your business or your workplace, but also your community. And it doesn't mean that you to turn everything into a long process, but the kind of conversations that the Sustainable Business Canvas catalyzes are the conversations that we now need to move into, right? So it's how we talk about business and the future of sustainability. What we celebrate is critical. It shapes the agenda. It shapes the art of the possible. So let's move the conversations to celebrating where there's a really interesting innovation in ownership design. There's a really interesting new board structure. There's a new company that is doing something innovative in how it deals with profits and reinvests and distributes and its dividends in a different way. Let's talk about the structural stuff that I think the Sustainable Business Canvas is catalyzing. And if we move the conversation to the right thing, that's where the broader initiatives and efforts will go.
Fantastic. Martin.
I totally agree with that. I think, what we have to realize is we're talking about redesigning the entire socioeconomic system. You cannot do that by a committee that sits down, draws a perfect map, describes exactly what we're going to move to, and then, one day we'll shift. This is an organic process which will happen over time by people adopting that mindset, moving in that direction, and it will be messy. There will be unintended consequences, and it's going to be an interesting ride. But the way we do that is you say, I'm going to change what I can where I can. I'm going to change what I can in my own life. I'm going to change and influence the people around me, my friends and my family. I'm going to influence my work. In some cases, like many of us, we're dedicating our entire work lives and the rest to this. So it's about being on that journey. It's about doing it, walking the walk, as well as talking the talk. As Erinch said, it's about getting people thinking in this way and ultimately saying we are creating a better alternative system. Do you want to come and be part of this alternative system with me? That's what I try and do every day. That's what you're all trying to do every day. And the more people that we bring on that journey, one day we might wake up and find that actually we're in this alternative, and that's what will get us there. And the canvas is just another great way of helping people to sort of engage with that dialogue and bring it to life.
Absolutely. Here's hoping. So we're going to finish this panel discussion with Sara. Thank you so much, Sara, for this excellent report. If you could please just share with us what's one key thought you'd like to leave the audience with today.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you all, Erinch, Martin, and Pablo, and the whole Altiorem team, as well as everyone watching in. And what I would like to end this conversation with is, I think, one of the kind of key points, and it really touches upon, you know, what Martin and Erinch has been talking about as well. But in order to be able to transition to a sustainable economy, I think it is essential to look into the root problem here. And the root problem is how we define success and development. I believe that we need to go away from only focusing on monetary gains, the financial gains, the kind of status and power, and move towards, you know, what do we want to achieve in the community? We want people to feel belonging, to feel like they're contributing, and that we have a thriving society and economy. And if we are to achieve that, we really need to redefine what is success and development. And I think that is key for everyone to understand.
Very well said, Sarah, and a wonderful way to end our discussion today. I'm going to now hand over to Pablo to close the presentation.
Thank you. What a fantastic discussion. There were so many excellent points there that I won't try to summarize. I'll just encourage you to watch the recording, and we will send some material out afterwards to help support it. But I want to just reflect on the fact that, as Martin said, as we try to move forward and do this in our own lives, encourage our own employers and the people around us, Altiorem is there for you to do that. That was why we exist, is to be a community-built, community-led resource dedicated to you, the people in the finance sector who are trying to change the world for the better. So please sign up. It's free. Volunteer if you can. We have university students who are looking to summarize and produce content that can help the whole industry, and you can help guide them and help build their career while also learning and supporting that change yourself. So please do engage with us. Please read the report. And I think one of the things that stood out, Ursula Le Guin said that there's no right answers to wrong questions. And so if you have a ESG metric framework of 150 questions or 1,200 indicators, as Martin said, in SFDR, and you're still wondering what sustainability might look like, then perhaps just look at the business model canvas, which only really has a dozen or so questions that you can ask, and it'll tell you all you need to know about the sustainability and the drawbacks of any business you want to look at. And so if we can leave you with that thought, we're just very grateful for you spending some time with us. And I just want to thank Martin, Erinch, Sara and Alexandra, and particularly I should call out as well Mariana, who did a tremendous job in collecting case studies, drawing the report together, and setting up this event. So I want to thank you all and look forward to staying in touch.